From JBS Studios in Greater New York, this is the JBS News Update with Teisha Bader.
I'm Teisha Bader with the JBS News Update for Tuesday, March the 28th, 2023. We open with more on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's announcement last night to delay the highly controversial judicial reform legislation in the Knesset. The announcement followed Netanyahu's firing of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant Saturday night, because he called for a halt in legislation, which prompted Israelis to take to the streets en masse, and a general strike was also called, grounding flights out of the country. Then last night, Netanyahu said he was calling for a pause in the legislation to avoid civil war and to allow room and time for dialogue, acting, he said, out of national responsibility, out of a desire to prevent a rift in the nation. I have decided to suspend the second and third readings of the law in the current Knesset session in order to allow time to try and reach that broad consensus ahead of legislation in the next Knesset session. Adding, though, that he would still push for judicial changes, saying one way or another, we will enact a reform that will restore the balance between the authorities that has been lost. The Prime Minister also sharply rebuked those reservists in the IDF who refused to volunteer in protest of the overhaul. Netanyahu saying the state of Israel cannot exist without the IDF, and the IDF cannot exist with refusal to serve. That it, he said, would be the end of our country. Therefore, I demand that the heads of the security services and of the army vigorously oppose the phenomenon of refusal to serve, not contain it, not understand it, not accept it, but put a stop to it. Well, one of the groups of organized reservists who are protesting, Brothers in Arms, said they would pause their protests after Netanyahu's announcement to give the negotiation process a chance. But they said, we are ready and organized to renew the protest in a short time, saying they would do so if it turns out that the time allowed for talks is being cynically used to further damage democracy. Israel's President Isaac Herzog, who has been pleading for dialogue on this issue for weeks, welcomed the Netanyahu announcement last night. Herzog said stopping the legislation is the right thing. This is the time to start an honest, serious, and responsible conversation that will urgently calm the spirits and lower the flames. And indeed, Herzog tonight hosted meetings at the president's residence in Jerusalem with negotiating teams from the coalition and the opposition, including Netanyahu's Likud party, Benny Gantz's National Unity Party, and Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid, among others. Meanwhile, there were reports of several incidents of violence from supporters of the overhaul, who also came out to demonstrate last night, said to have been carried out by right-wing extremists among them. A television news team and several Arab passers-by were said to have been assaulted, and Israel police arrested an Israeli Jewish teenager for an assault on an Arab cab driver in the capital. Looking now at some other news, police in Greece said they arrested two suspects of Pakistani origin, reportedly planning terror attacks in Athens against Israelis, including at a Jewish restaurant there. The Associated Press said the suspects were allegedly part of an overseas terrorism network. Well, Israel and the United Arab Emirates today finalized an agreement recognizing their citizens' respective driver's licenses, an agreement that will allow Israeli tourists and temporary residents of the UAE to drive there on their Israeli licenses and allow Emiratis to drive in Israel using their local licenses. The two countries also signed a free trade agreement this past Sunday. And the UAE pardoned and released an Arab-Israeli photographer, Fida Kawan, a year after she was convicted on drug charges after cannabis was found in her possession. Cocaine was also found, which she claimed was not hers. Well, she was initially sentenced to death, which was reduced to life in prison on appeal, and then as a special gesture after a plea from Herzog, she was pardoned and flew home on Sunday. Taking a look now at our programming for tonight on JBS for Tuesday, March the 28th. At 7 o'clock, I speak with veteran journalist for I-24 News, Calev Ben-David, who shares what the atmosphere in Israel is like today after Netanyahu's announcement last night, and what Netanyahu said and meant in his remarks, as well as what the future might hold in this never-before-seen dramatic situation in Israel. At 7:30, Roy Schondorf, Israel's former Deputy Attorney General, shares his views on the need for judicial reform and the need for compromise. At 8, Chuck Freilich and Lieutenant Colonel Yochai Guiski join Benjamin Anthony to assess the context and implications of the recently announced Chinese-brokered rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. At 9, Eli Kohanim speaks with Arab-Israeli activist Yosef Haddad. At 9:30, Kohanim speaks with Sheila Nazarian about the protests in Iran. At 10, Russian-American female writers talk about how the immigrant experience has informed their writing. And coming up next, it's Good Week Israel. And that's the JBS News Update for Tuesday, March the 28th, 2023. I'm Teisha Bader. Stay healthy, stay well.